No, that's not right. There we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. I'm going to turn down the volume a little bit because I seem to be actually quite loud. Uh, I don't want to be pushing that loud. Okay. Just want to get it just below red. No, it's still hitting red. What the heck? I swear, I mess with my sound setup way too much. Okay, that's not helping. Is it this one? Yeah, it's that one. Okay. So, no, let's dial it back a bit. That's about right. Okay, sweet. Hello, Molly. What's going on? Oh, tomato soup. I should have gotten some tomato soup now that you mention it. Okay. Let me actually open Twitch on my other screen. Oh, never mind. Check options. What do you want to bet that my bot will end up crashing the stream? Or crashing the encoding PC? We'll see. What is even going on there? Wow, I didn't even realize that the weekday bunch was actually pretty well stacked. Huh. Salamanbot would never. Salamanbot would do exactly that. Also, I need to remember to do something real quick. Where is it? It was "You Will Not Remain." Yeah, no. So the estimated length of "You Will Not Remain" is 34 hours. I'm gonna change that down to 1. Whoops. There we go. Okay. You're here for coffee and stories, and you're all out of beans. Well, sounds like you need to go get some coffee. So right now, oh no, shit! I crashed Salamanbot. Wait, what the heck? Expecting a property name enclosed in double quotes. One moment. I don't see. Okay. I think we're good now. Someone try voting on "You Will Not Remain." Dead Tom's dead and Newt killed him. Wait, who's Tom? Dang it, Blackjack. You're going to make me make another alias. What the heck is Nobody Saves the World? It was a quote from the best version of Treasure Island. The Muppet version, I'm guessing? I've never actually seen the Muppet version. I gotta see that at some point. Maybe we can do that for a movie night. Okay. Treasure Planet is great, and I will hear no other thing against Treasure Planet. Treasure Planet is amazing. Also, the history behind Treasure Planet is almost as interesting as the movie itself. Anyway. You didn't knock it. You said it was a close second. But it's not the perfect one. Also, I need to do a couple of things because I believe right now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and select Calliope's Tale. Because I promised that I would be going through Calliope's Tale starting last week. Story select. Yeah, I promised myself that I would be doing Calliope's Tale last week, and, well, we didn't, so now we're doing it today. I have no idea what Calliope's Tale is. I believe it was submitted by Desalona. I did end up getting author's permission, of course, and they were very interested in having it read. So I'm actually looking forward to sharing this with them afterwards. You hope you never hear a perfect story. It'll destroy your drive to tell your own. Could there be more than one perfect story? I guess not. God, you missed a really good story in the most recent anime night because we ended up doing Odd Taxi, and Odd Taxi is so good. Like, holy crap, I really love that. Everything came together in the end in such a flashy way. Amazing. It was in sub. I don't actually know if Odd Taxi is dubbed yet. Hold up. I'm gonna look it up. Odd Taxi dub. I don't. No, there is an English dub. Wow, huh. Didn't realize that. Well, now I know. Have you seen Odd Taxi before, Blackjack? Hey, Mango, how you doing? You can't watch sub because you can't just sit and watch shows. You need to be doing something at the same time. That's fair. I assume you would have something else on the other screen or something. Ah, thank you, Dupless, for the shout out. I was actually just going to ask. You know what? Blackjack doesn't even stream. Story of Let's Do the Writing. What is Let's Do the Writing? Is that an actual game or is that just a category on Twitch? Yeah, look at Dupless. Look at him go. You wrote and people watched. Wow. Maybe you should do more often. I'm sure that a lot of the Reddit community would probably be very interested to see your writing process. Although I don't know if that would slow down your writing process too much. I've done a little bit of writing and streaming at some point, and I don't know. I don't think that I'm good at, or I don't think I have enough interesting stuff to say to keep it interesting. It was the most boring thing on earth. Yeah. There was another streamer that actually a game developer really, but they did visual novels, so writer, game developer, lots of hats. And Two Flower at some point ended up coming in while I was streaming, what was it? Retro Hearts or, damn it, I don't actually remember the name of it now, which sucks because it was a really great game. But yeah, they ended up releasing another game at some point. But they ended up streaming pretty much the entire writing and development process, and it was really cool because they had a lot to say. Every Sunday they would just end up doing it. Or no, not Sunday. Every Saturday they would stream it. I need to watch more people on Twitch. I always feel guilty about not watching people on Twitch because it's just like, I don't know. Like, I can't be around to support the people that I actually like. Like, who's on right now? We got Mother Gamer, Quiet Emerald, Smahams, who's doing Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, Kingsfield 3 with level 1 ult. I don't remember that one. Kegel. Oh, Kegel's going through Solasta. That's interesting. Naz is doing Sekiro. But yeah. Well, I've got a lot of stuff to read through. If you spent all your time visiting friends, well, you would definitely know a lot about that manga. You spend a lot more time visiting friends than I can ever devote. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's always weird for me because I barely watch Twitch anymore. I've been kind of wandering around and trying to find people that I actually enjoy. But it really is just I don't have time. I usually end up getting off of work and then I try and find something that I like to do. Recently I've been doing a lot of Eternal and Elden Ring, and that's just what I spend my time doing instead of watching people. Now, it could be argued that I could just be watching some people while I was doing those, which I do to some degree, but it makes it sort of a bad time to chat. Eternal's not so bad because Eternal's turn-based. You did get an idea for another short, an existential horror. Ooh, nice. / sci-fi. Oh, that reminds me. At some point, I'm actually going to start doing, probably during this next week, I will be going through the first couple of chapters of the rewrite for the Dark Forest. So we'll actually start getting into the Dark Forest lore and all that. I'm enjoying doing the rewrite, but I also need to devote more time to it. That's basically how it always is, though. You end up getting to the weekend and you realize you have so little time on the weekend because it's only 2 days. You tend to find someone doing something similar to what you want to do. That's fair. That's probably a good thing. Oh, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but at some point, and by at some point I mean at the end of this week, we are going to be starting a brand new fundraiser because I do this every year. Starting on Earth Day, which is the 21st, and going until the 26th, we will be fundraising for One Tree Planted. And I've got a whole bunch of incentives, including a maid outfit at some point, and maybe some pancake making, who knows. And I am hoping that I can kind of lead the charge on the donations there. Now, with the recent things that I've been doing, I might be a little bit lower on funds than usual, but shouldn't be too bad. It's Penkaku. The pronunciation is important. That's very true. That's very true. How could I forget? That reminds me, I need to actually add a command to link that. Anyway, also Mango's doing overlays for everyone for that particular fundraiser, which I'm super hyped about. I've actually been looking into overlays lately, and I was wondering if I could do it, like try and get a custom one set up, because I like, hold up. I think it's 5? No, that's not it. This one. So this is an overlay that I ended up making myself for D&D. And this is one that I wanted to use for a really long time and just never actually did much with, because we never did much D&D. But I would love more of a simple flourish. I think you're selling yourself short. I've seen them. They look really great. I'm looking forward to using it. Yeah. But this is something that I have made myself, and I'm kind of curious if I can eventually get better at just overlay making, because this is just made with a bunch of non-copyright images that I found online, picture frames and all that stuff. I actually quite like this, to the point where I've used this in a couple of other locations as well. But yeah. Anyway, I have a lot of stuff to read tonight, and I think that we have quite a few people here. By the way, Blackjack, when is that existential horror gonna happen? You just gonna sit down and try and write it out in one go, or is it going to be in the background while you write, while you edit? Yeah, edit the next one. The next book. How far is the next book along, by the way? I know you're editing it, but I don't know how far the editing itself is going. It's actually really cool, though, that you made a profit on the first book. Let's see here. You're about halfway through editing. Yeah, it's got to take a while. Is it longer or shorter than the first book? Bit shorter, but pretty close. Now then. Story roll. All right, so here is Calliope's Tale. Let's get started, shall we? So if anyone wants to follow along, this is on Archive of Our Own. I know that I messaged Falcom Reynolds earlier, but just the name makes me laugh. Think you're finally going to sit down to start your little graphic novel? Nice. I'd be interested to see that. There's a couple of other people that I've actually been following on Twitter that have been doing their own web comics, and it eventually turned it into a graphic novel. I think they've been doing a 365 days of writing. It started out as 100 days of writing, and then they just kept going because they kept having more stuff to do. All right, so Calliope's Tale by Falcom Reynolds. Chapter 1, also prologue. When the goddesses woke up after the sea was created, they had no knowledge of the world or the people in it. The world was only ocean, a great blue pearl floating in the starry sky. But Zoriel, mother of the land, realized that though the oceans were full of life, they were limited, held back by the very water that sustained them. She dove down to the seabed and grabbed great handfuls of earth, gouging deep trenches in the ocean floor. When she rose up, dirt and sand trailed from her fingers, scattering across the ocean. Where it fell, it formed great ridges and mountains. When she surfaced, she tried to build land masses with the earth, but it sank beneath the waves. Zoriel turned to the ocean creatures. "One of you," she said. "Come to me, and I will build a new world on your back." 2 creatures came to her, a turtle and a great fish. She placed the earth upon both of their backs, and they grew to tremendous sizes, losing their flippers and fins and becoming stone and soil. They became the 2 great continents of the world. "Sister," said Athu from the waters, You cannot leave us to go on to the land. You are bound to the sea like we are. Of this I know, Zoriel said, and grasping a piece of sharp coral, cut her right arm away from her body. It fell onto the smaller continent and became the god Melite, the progenitor of the land, and those who dwell upon it. He gained form and stood up. Zoriel pointed to the land with her left hand and said, Go, child, and give this land life. What will I do? The new god asked. Whatever you wish, Zoriel said. But beware, child, for if your creations stray too far from the land, they will answer to us. I will watch over him from above, Kalari said, and her voice was booming thunder. I can see even onto the land, for my reach is wide. Zoriel returned to the sea, tired, and slipped below the waters to lay on the seabed and sleep. I'm actually not sure if it's Melite? Melite? I'm going to go with Melite, actually. Melite turned to the sea. Any who wish it, he said, to the animals and plants of the sea, may come upon the land, and I will reform you so that you may thrive here. For he knew he could not create things of his own, but he could change the shape of the creations of his mother and aunts. Seaweeds and sea ferns and fish and shelled bugs all came to the shore, and when he touched them, they grew into new forms with legs and necks and dry scales and skin. Some of them Melite took into himself, and thus he gave birth to the strange creatures with hooves and fur, and the creatures he birthed laid no more eggs, instead birthing their own young as he had them. Some of his creatures went back to the sea, finding the land not to their liking. Some remained on the land, exploring their new home. Some even looked upwards and begged Kalari for wings, and she granted them, and the skies were filled with birds. Humans were different. They saw all the world and sought to inhabit it, and they did not ask the gods to be changed and changed the world instead. They built houses and roads and cities and kingdoms and ships to traverse the sea, ships to go far and find new things. The first time a human sailed out past the breakers, Zoriel tested them with rocks and reefs, sharp stone and coral, the sacred tool she'd used to create their Allfather. The humans were frightened. They turned back, fled from the ocean. The second time humans pushed their vessels out beyond the waves, Zoriel tested them again, and they passed. Then Kalari tested them, sending a great storm to overturn their boat, and again they fled, back to the safety of the land. The third time, they braved both Zoriel's reefs and Kalari's winds. The storm overturned their ship, threw them into the water, and it was there that... Oh, God. Give me a moment. Zikali Thiruvani, I assume. And it was there that Zikali Thiruvani tested them to see if they would survive. They failed, and their bodies drifted into the waves and did not wash up on the shore. The sisters turned away, sighing. All but Athu. Athu rose from the depths and pondered them. You were so brave, she said, and you tried so very hard. To see you die now is a sad thing. I will not spit in my sister's face and bring you back, but I will take you and turn you into something new. Transformation is ever possible. She took their legs, giving them a smooth sea beast's tail instead, and covered them in the tough, rubbery skin of dolphins and whales. She gave them powerful claws like sea glass and basalt, and eyes that reflected the light that flashes of lightning on the waves, and strong bodies to push through the strongest currents. Then she took them and breathed new life into the strange forms, and sent them away into the sea to be the first of the Marids, Athu's children. They sang and grew, mermaids growing to mermatrons. They had their children, raised them, and sent them out into the ocean to make their own lives. And when they were finished with children, the oldest mermatrons sought Othu out. "We are tired," they said, "for we have lived long, and we no longer take joy in the light of the surface. We long to embrace the deeps, Mother Othu, to lay in the dark and sing to each other. Let us go. Let us be free. We do not wish to die. We just wish to move on." And so Othu took their bodies and transformed them again, slowly and carefully, and each matron regained their gills and swam down to the seafloor, and grew and changed and became vast and terrifying and beautiful. Thus they became the first matriarchs, and since then there have been few who received such honor, such powerful blessings from the goddess of the deeps. In the darkness of the bottom of the sea, the matriarchs sleep. When another joins their number, they wake and sing, and that song ripples through the world, stirring all living creatures. But they slip away again not long after. They do not remain awake, only stirring when called. One day, they will wake for good. That is a heck of a setup. All right. Chapter 2, Heart's Gold, Part 1. They'd had to swing the ship broadside to the beach to print... and already there's a mistake. They'd had to swing the ship broadside to the pin... They'd had to swing the ship broadside to the beach to pin the monster in the lagoon, and they fought them viciously. There were deep gouges in the hull where its claws had raked across the dark wood. Crew members in the hold were still desperately patching the holes to prevent the ship from taking on any more water. Previously, the lagoon had been a clear, brilliant blue. Now it was stained dark with black blood that swirled like ink through the lapping waves. The monster was floating in the center of the cove, dark coils limp. Its slick, smooth body looped around itself. Now that it wasn't so bunched up, it was easy to tell how large it was. Probably longer than the ship in its entirety. From the smooth, deep brown skin of the face and head under a mop of black hair, and spiked webbing to the tip of the long, sinuous tail, the Merid was all muscle. It had been a swift, sleek creature, able to wedge its 2-inch talons into the cracks between the hull planks and tear at them. Now, its wet body was punctured with bullet wounds and slashes from swords or bayonets. Ianthe leaned on the railing of the midnight sun, musket beside her, and let out a small breath. They'd seen the Merid while circling the island. It had been blocking their access to the clear freshwater stream that fed into the sea. They'd gone around, trying to find another creek, but scouted no other sources. Strangely, the Merid hadn't fled before the ship as they normally did. This one guarded the cove. They tried to reason with it, calling that they needed to enter the cove, offering food or treasures, but it hadn't listened. They'd had no choice but to try and sail past it, and when they did, it had attacked. Ianthe shook her head. They would burn the corpse once they'd hauled it out of the water and onto the beach and dried it as much as they could. Or, if Captain Makulo said, they'd leave it out to sea to be eaten by scavengers. Whatever they did, it still filled Ianthe with a sickened displeasure. She didn't like the whole matter. It was a damn shame to kill something just because it was in the way. She looked over the body. It was easy to tell now that it wasn't moving. She looked over the body. It was easy to tell now that it wasn't moving around that it was a mermaid, a female of the species. She wondered what it had been doing here, at such a large size. Wouldn't it have gone further out into the ocean by now, to grow? Someone below, in the boats towing the corpse to shore, shouted, "Mate Ianthe!" Ianthe glanced over. "There's something down here, in the water." The crewman, a wiry and excitable man called Leng, was leaning far enough over the edge of the boat to set it rocking dangerously. Is there? What is it? Yes! He peered into the water. Not a stone or a piece of coral. So what is it? In response, Lang dove into the water. The other crew member in the boat flailed to keep the boat afloat. Ianthe winced. This was going to bite Lang later, when he was trying to wash the mildly toxic Merid blood out of his eyes and clothing. Lang's lithe form powered down to the sandy cove bed. Ianthe watched him circle around a darker spot on the white sand. He was right. There was something down there. After several attempts to move whatever it was, he shot back to the surface and gasped, spitting out water. "It's a chest!" he called, gesturing down. He squinted, eyes flooded with bloodied seawater. "Treasure or something, I think. A cache, maybe." Ah, that explained a lot. The Merid could have fled the lagoon if it had chosen to dive beneath the boat, but it hadn't. It had stubbornly stayed and hissed at them in its strange pseudo-language and fought them and died. Now she knew it was because it had something to protect, something it didn't want them to have. Well, they might as well get it. "Go ahead," Ianthe called down. "Get someone else and retrieve it, if you can. We'll open it on shore." It took 4 of the strongest crew to dig the chest out of the sand and drag it to the shore, over the white seabed. It was too heavy to float. Ianthe thought that perhaps they'd been lucky, and there'd be gold inside or something else valuable. The task was made all the harder by the blood clouding the water, though by the time they started to try and move the chest in earnest, the tide had shifted, and the water began to wash the blood out of the sea. Resting on the beach, the chest reached Ianthe's waist. She looked it over carefully. "Think it's dangerous," Captain Winthrop Mikulos said, standing next to her. "I doubt it," she replied, shaking her head. "Why would the Merid guard something dangerous?" "To us." "Something dangerous to us is likely dangerous to a Merid, unless it happens to be a food store," Ianthe said. "Merids could eat things that would kill humans, like octopuses and cone snails." "Fair enough." Mikulo stepped forward and reached out, taking hold of the heavy, cracking, sodden leather strap that held the chest shut. He unbuckled it and lifted the lid. Immediately, a wave of seawater poured out, washing over the boots of anyone nearby and soaking into the pale sand. Ianthe and Mikulo didn't move, though a few of the other crew members hopped back, startled. After a few moments, the pirates inched forward again, and peering into the chest. Ianthe shielded her eyes in her hand and tried to keep the glare of the water so that she could see. Ianthe shielded her eyes with her hand and tried to keep the glare off the water so she could see the dark, wavering surface. There was no gleam of gold or shimmer of pearls. Instead, there was a mess of tangled seaweed and a few pieces of colorful coral. Scattered throughout, Ianthe could see the glint of a few silver pieces, but other than that, the chest did not seem to contain anything of value. Blah, 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 blah. This is actually a pretty good read so far. It was hard to see. Ianthe squinted against the light. Something about this didn't feel right. She gripped her weathered sword hilt with one hand. The waters stirred. There was a moment of panic among the assembled crew, and then a creature surfaced and blinked sleepily in the sunlight. It was a small, almost human figure. Dark skin and eyes, plump arms and hands, and fat cheeks. But on its torso were the long, gaping red slits, and where its ears should have been, there were slitted holes surrounded by webbing, and rather than legs, there were instead a long, dark, rubbery skin tail. Ianthe felt her heart go cold in her chest and caught her breath. horror dawning on her. No wonder the mermaid... No, not a mermaid. Matron. No wonder she had fought so hard, tried to stop the ship from entering the lagoon. No wonder she was so large and yet so close to shore, not out in the ocean like most larger Marids. No wonder she was here instead of out there feasting on fish and plumbing the depths for her ancestors. This chest held no material treasure. It held her child. Several of the crew whispered and warded themselves against evil, though against the creature or against the crime, Ianthe could not tell. Nothing will send us to the bottom of the sea, one of the crew whispered, face pale. We never should have fought her. We never should have come here. We didn't know any better, one of the deckhands hissed back, but it seemed half a plea both to themselves and perhaps to Otho as well. Captain Maculo stared down at the baby Marid, eyes cold. Ianthe swallowed hard. She knew that look. He was hiding his uncertainty, but this was when he made his harshest decisions. What do we do? She asked him. Kill it, he said, after a long moment's hesitation. Ianthe stopped, stunned. She fumbled for words. Oh, we can't, she said finally, desperately. We can't. I won't. We won't. The captain's face was hard, but the ice in his eyes was melting already. Ianthe prayed he would relent. There was a long, tense silence, and finally he sighed and looked down. I know. That would be too simple. That would be the easy answer. We can't kill it. We've done enough of that today. Ianthe let out the breath she had been holding. So, what do we do? She asked again. We take it with us, Nicola replied. Bring it on board. The crew members stirred. Ianthe looked down at the mermaid. It didn't know what was happening. It clung to the side of the chest and pushed itself mostly underwater, where its flared gills could breathe. The dark eyes looked over them all, wide and afraid. Does anyone have a problem with that? Does anyone have a problem with that? The captain asked. There was silence. Maculo sighed. Deal with it, he muttered to Ianthe. She nodded and stepped up to the chest, turning to put her back to the baby. The crew wouldn't voice their opinions against Maculo with him here, but with Ianthe they would speak, because she would listen to them and try to understand and address their concerns. That was her job. They would tell her what they really felt about any decisions Maculo made. Another moment of silence as Maculo headed back towards the boats to make Another moment of silence as Maculo headed back towards the boats to take them out towards the midnight sun. Ianthe looked over the assembled crew. Does anyone have any issues with bringing this creature on board? She asked, slowly and carefully. Another stirring, but now Maculo was gone, and they were more willing to speak. I do, said one of the hold cannoneers, a burly man called Gunnar. What do you have to say? Flat tone, flat stare. Generally, he was rather irreverent, calling the goddesses your gods, keeping himself away from them as if the seas of other countries were ruled by different deities, and Ianthe disliked his audacity. At her tone, he swallowed nervously before continuing. It ain't natural, he said, frown heavy on his flushed face. We shouldn't be too close to it. Captain was right. We should kill it. Captain also decided against that plan of action. We aren't going to, Ianthe said, soft but firm. We will carry this child on board and keep it with us. It's wrong, Gunnar argued. He glanced around at the crew members, hoping for support. It's wrong, ain't it? Lang, who was studying the sand, looked up. We need to take it, he said quietly, black eyes more serious than Ianthe had ever seen them. We did this. It's our responsibility. She could read his expression even though the sheen of... She could read his expression even through the sheen of dark blood that persisted from his dive into the lagoon waters. It was irritating his eyes, inflaming the edges to a puffy red and scumming the pupils over. But he didn't look like the pain he was suffering was physical. To keep a monster? Ianthe looked back at the baby mermaid. It was hiding now, wrapping seaweed around its head and ducking beneath the water. She could see the fuzz on its scalp where black hair was growing. She's not a monster, she said firmly. And if you think otherwise, you should stay here on this island and find passage to the next ship. Silence. The island was far enough from any other that it would take days for another ship to reach it, and it wasn't on any normal sailing route. Anyone left here wouldn't see another ship for weeks, perhaps months. If you stay with the ship and find that you still cannot bear to be around her, you may leave when we next dock. Is that understood? No one contested her. Ianthe let out a breath and turned back to the crew who had hauled the chest onto the beach. Get this into the boat. Get this into a boat, she said, gesturing to the chest. We're taking her and it with us. The whole thing, the nearest crewmate, a powerfully built woman called Aisha, glanced dubiously down at the chest. Yes, but can't you see she lives there? Ianthe snapped, cutting her off. Aisha shut her mouth. Understood, she muttered, and helped bring the mermaid aboard. All right, I will be right back. I'm going to grab something to drink, and we will continue. This has been a very interesting story so far. All right. We be back. Okay. Chapter 3. Mother of Poor... Poor Pavel. Wow. Chapter 3. Mother of Pearl. They didn't know where to put her so she would be safe, so they kept her in the captain's cabin. She was small and scared and didn't like to be in the dark all the time. Ianthe and the captain stood and stared at it. I don't know how to take care of this thing, she started. Neither do I, McCullough answered, shaking his head. But we have to. We have to. Would a married feed like a human child? He raised one brow, glancing dubiously over at Ianthe. I would assume not. The mermaid blinked at both of them in the low light, then yawned, showing sharp, thin teeth like slivers of oyster shell. The captain's eyes went wide. Oh, no, he said fervently. Definitely not, Ianthe agreed. So, what does she eat? I'm not certain. Fish? Mussels? Clams? Mussels and clams would make sense, McCullough murmured, rubbing the side of his face. Do we know if anyone could tell us about Marids? Do we know of anyone who could tell us about Marids? Ianthe racked her brains, trying to come up with the answer. I'm not certain, she said, but Port Kanzaru lies due east. Perhaps we can check there for anyone who may know more? McCullough paused, thinking. We can make it in a few days, he said. Will it survive? We'll see. Lang came up with the first breakthrough. Even though before they'd even left the cove, a few days after the fight, he dove under the ship and pried off a patch of mussels that had suckered themselves onto the old wood, bringing them aboard to dump into a barrel of seawater. If she eats anything, it'll be those, he said, wiping water out of his eyes. They were still red, but he was at least no longer blinded. That or fish, but I'm willing to bet it's that. Crack it open and give it to her. Or just give it to her. Maybe she'll be able to open it herself. She helped drag the barrel over to the captain's quarters. They let him stay to see if it worked. After all, he'd gone through the trouble of going and getting them. Ianthe opened the lid of the chest and offered the mermaid a dark-shelled mussel from the cluster in the barrel. Her tiny hands grabbed onto it, and she looked it over curiously. Can she open that? McCullough asked, frowning. We'll find out, Ianthe said, standing back. The mermaid scrabbled at the shell, but couldn't break it open. She stared at it, then looked up to Ianthe and held it out. Ma, she said, out loud, clearly distressed. Her gills flared in the air. Ianthe tamped down her panic for a second and took the mussel from the mermaid. Just a minute, she said, looking over to McCullough and trying not to appear as terrified as she felt. I'll get it, at least partway. She sat down next to the chest and pulled out her belt knife, jamming the tip in the seams between the shell halves. The mussel was doing a fine job of squeezing itself shut. She narrowed her eyes and worked the tip into the shell. As she wiggled the blade, she felt someone tug at her hair and jumped. The mermaid was toying with the thick locks, patting them gently, pulling them occasionally. Be careful, Ianthe said nervously, and looked back down to the mussel. The mermaid subsided. McCullough watched, eyes flicking from Ianthe to the mermaid and back again. She was gripping the edge of the chest, eyes just barely